You're standing at the mouth of a cave in what is now South Africa, a million years before anyone writes a word of history. The air is cold enough to kill you by morning. Around you, no matches, no flint sparked on purpose, nothing that looks like invention. And yet there is a fire burning, low and deliberate, tended by something that is not quite human as you'd recognize it. That single detail breaks almost everything you assumed about when intelligence began. Because discovering fire was never the hard part. Nature hands you fire constantly in lightning strikes and volcanic vents and smoldering peat. The hard part was refusing to let it go out. Seriously, think about that. The name people reach for is Homo erectus, and the evidence isn't a campfire story, it's ash. At Wonderwork Cave, researchers examining sediment layers found burned bone fragments and plant ash dated to roughly 1 million years ago, buried deep inside the cave that wind or wildfire couldn't have carried them in. That's the first widely accepted evidence of controlled fire use, published by an international team led by Francesco Berna in 2012. Not a spark, a habit. Here's the layer most people miss. Controlling fire isn't about lighting it, it's about behavior. It's about carrying an ember for hours across unfamiliar terrain. It's about someone staying awake while everyone else sleeps, feeding a flame that could just as easily burn the whole camp down. That single responsibility may have reshaped the social structure of an entire species before language even existed in a form we'd understand. Fire didn't just keep bodies warm, it cooked food, and cooked food digests faster, which means less energy spent on digestion and more available for something else entirely, something expensive, something hungry, your brain. And that's where this story stops being about warmth and starts being about what fire may have built inside your skull. Richard Wrangham, a primatologist at Harvard, built an entire theory around that hungry brain. He argued that cooking, not meat itself, is what powered the dramatic growth of the human brain over the last 2 million years, a hypothesis known as the cooking hypothesis, laid out in his book Catching Fire in 2009. Raw food takes enormous energy to break down. Cooked food surrenders its calories almost instantly. That difference, multiplied across 1 million meals, across 100,000 generations, adds up to something staggering. Smaller guts, bigger brains. That's the trade. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, spend nearly 6 hours a day just chewing raw plant matter to extract enough calories to survive. Humans spend under an hour eating total. Something freed up that time, and cooking is the leading candidate, because a fire doesn't just soften food, it also unlocks proteins and starches that raw digestion barely touches. But there's a second layer hiding underneath the first, and it has nothing to do with calories. It's about darkness. Before fire, the day ended when the sun went down. Every hour after dusk was hidden, dangerous, useless for anything except sleep. Fire extended the day. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner studied the Jew Hansi people of the Kalahari and found that conversation around firelight looked completely different from daytime talk. Daytime conversation was dominated by practical matters and complaints, while nighttime firelight conversation shifted towards stories, myths, and social bonding, published in her 2014 study in PNAS. Fire didn't just light the dark, it created the first stage humans ever had. Around a flame, gossip becomes myth. Myth becomes shared belief. Shared belief becomes the invisible glue that lets strangers cooperate, trust each other, build something larger than a hunting party. Every campfire story you've ever heard sits on top of a habit that started with something that wasn't even fully human yet. And if fire built the brain, and fire built the story, what happens when you take it away? What happens when the one thing every human society relied on simply isn't there? Fire also rewired something even more basic than storytelling itself: safety. A wild leopard will not walk towards flame. Neither will a lion, a hyena, or almost anything with a nose sensitive enough to register smoke as danger. For a slow, clawless, weaponless primate sleeping on open ground, that single fact may have mattered more than any spear ever invented. Fire didn't just cook dinner, it rented you a few hours of biological invincibility every single night. That safety changed where humans could sleep, and where you sleep changes everything else. Populations that no longer needed to nest defensively in trees the way chimpanzees still do could settle onto open ground in larger, more exposed groups, a shift researchers studying early hominin sites have linked to increased social density and cooperation. More bodies sleeping in the open, more brains awake together near the same light. None of this means you are untouchable. Fire is not a guaranteed shield, and history is full of proof. In 79 AD, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius overwhelmed the fire, tools, and shelters of an entire Roman city within hours, killing thousands who had every advantage their era offered. Fire tames small threats, cold, darkness, predators sized to fear a flame. It does nothing against forces operating on a scale fire was never built to answer. Pompeii isn't a failure of the fire hypothesis, it's the edge of it. The exception shows you exactly where the rule was always meant to stop. And that boundary is the whole point. Every technology humans have ever built, fire included, works by carving out a small pocket of control inside a universe that owes you nothing. But there's one more layer, stranger than all the others, and it isn't about survival at all. It's about what happens to a species that spends 1,000,000 years staring into the same flickering light every night with nothing else to do but think. Staring into fire does something measurable to the human mind. A 2014 study led by psychologist Christopher Lynn at the University of Alabama found that watching a simulated fire lowered participants' blood pressure the longer they watched, with the effect growing stronger the more social the viewing context. Not entertainment, regulation. Somewhere in your evolutionary past, staring at flame became a way to calm a nervous system built for constant threat. That's the layer nobody expects. Fire wasn't only fuel for the body or light for the story, it was the first tool that let the human mind rest without switching off entirely, awake, aware, and still at ease. Every meditation practice, every quiet evening spent watching a screen glow in the dark sits on a habit that predates language, predates agriculture, predates almost everything you'd call civilization. So who discovered fire first? Nobody did, not really. It was already there, in lightning and lava and burning grass, waiting for something patient enough to keep it. What was discovered wasn't fire itself, it was restraint. It was the decision to feed something dangerous instead of running from it night after night for 1,000,000 years until it changed the shape of your skull, the structure of your social world, and the rhythm of your own resting heartbeat. Go back to that cave, the cold air, the low flame, the figure hunched beside it who isn't quite human yet. You called that scene ancient. Look again. That figure isn't a stranger from deep time. That's the first draft of you, making the same trade you still make every evening when the lights go low and something in you settles. You are not separate from that firekeeper. You are what happens after 1,000,000 years of someone refusing to let the flame die. The fire went out long ago. You're still burning.